Most of us have had the experience of knowing on some level that something is over and not let it be over. A relationship that ended badly, or maybe just quietly in the way some relationships do. A friendship you outgrew, or that outgrew you. The group that slowly dissolved and left a gap you didn't expect to feel so sharply. A career path that closed off. A version of your life that didn't happen the way you'd planned. And the strange, persistent pull back toward it, even when you know the door is closed. The mind keeps returning, keeps circling, keeps rehearsing the same conversations, reconstructing what was lost, running the same calculations as though this time the numbers might come out differently. And the thing that makes it so hard to see clearly is that we've learned to dress it up. We tell ourselves we're being devoted, that we're not the kind of person who just walks away, that holding on is a measure of how much something mattered to us. But if you sit with it honestly, if you really look at what's happening when you keep returning to something you can't change, there's something else going on underneath all that. Something that has less to do with devotion and more to do with control, or rather the illusion of control. Because as long as we're still gripping, the outcome feels somehow still negotiable, still in play. Letting go means admitting that it isn't. It means acknowledging that the thing has moved beyond our reach. And that acknowledgement is the part that's genuinely hard. Not because we're weak, but because it means releasing the story of ourselves as someone who can still fix it, still change it, still make it come out right. Buddhist thinking has a specific and precise word for what we're describing. Not the generic English word attachment, we'll come back to that, but something underneath it, deeper. The Pali word tanha, which means craving or thirst. It's a visceral reaching. The first-person experience of wanting something to be other than it is. And what the Buddhist teachers observed with a precision that holds up completely to this day is that this craving, this thirst, tanha, is not a character flaw. It's simply what minds do when left to their own devices. The question isn't whether you feel it, it's whether you recognize it for what it is. Because when you do, the grip begins to loosen. Not through effort, not through deciding to feel differently, but through seeing clearly what's actually happening. What are you really afraid will occur if you open your hand? The Pali language has another word that sits just above tanha in the Buddhist understanding of suffering, upadana, which gets translated into English as attachment. But again, the translation doesn't quite carry what the word contains, because upadana also means fuel, the material that feeds a fire and keeps it burning. Clinging, understood this way, isn't simply an emotional state, it's what sustains the suffering, what gives it oxygen, what keeps it going past the point where it might otherwise have burned itself out. The craving, the tanha, is the thirst. Upadana is what you do with it, the reaching for the glass. In our society, attachment tends to be seen as a virtue, a sign of depth. We say someone is deeply attached to their family, to their work, to a place they love, and we mean it as praise. Evidence that they care, that they're not one of those people who moves through life without really touching it. But upadana is pointing at something more specific. It's describing a particular relationship to experience, one built on the belief, usually unspoken, rarely examined, that what we love can be held in place, that what we fear can be prevented through sufficient vigilance, that the grip is what keeps things from slipping away. And this goes far beyond romantic love, though love is where most of us first encounter it in its most vivid form. We cling to the version of a career we imagined for ourselves in our 20s, the path that made sense before life rerouted it. We keep pressing toward that original shape even when the road has clearly gone somewhere else. We cling to status, to the particular way we were regarded in an earlier chapter, checking without quite admitting we're checking whether that regard is still intact. We cling to the old friend group even after the connections have thinned, showing up to gatherings that feel increasingly like performances of a closeness that no longer quite exists. And perhaps most invisibly, we cling to our ideas about ourselves. The story of who we are, what we're capable of, what we deserve. Stories formed long ago in conditions that no longer exist, that we carry around like furniture we've simply forgotten we can put down. What the Western world has done particularly well is dress this clinging in the language of virtue. The person who never abandons their vision, who holds the line through years of difficulty, who persists when everyone else has moved on, this person is celebrated. Persistence is a genuine good. But it has a shadow. The shadow is the grip that has outlasted its own purpose. The holding on that has become purely habitual, that no longer serves any real aim, but continues because releasing it would mean becoming someone new. And becoming someone new is frightening in ways that are genuinely hard to articulate. What happens practically is that the mind never fully settles. There's a constant low hum of returning to the thing, to the worry about the thing, to the question of whether it's still there, still intact, still secure. Anyone who's been in a relationship they were afraid of losing will recognize this. It's that faint undercurrent of unease beneath an ordinary evening. The way happiness, in those moments, carries within it a quiet dread about its own duration. And the cost of all this monitoring, all this circling, is the experience itself, the direct, unmediated living of the thing you're working so hard to preserve. A conversation held together by anxiety isn't really a conversation, it's a performance of one. A friendship maintained through effort rather than ease starts to feel like neither. We sacrifice the experience in the attempt to secure it and then wonder why we feel, despite holding everything so tightly, as though something is still slipping away. This doesn't resolve through thinking about it. The mind can understand it perfectly and still not release anything. Understanding the shape of the cage doesn't open the door. For that, we have to look honestly at what the grip is actually protecting, which turns out to be something quite different from what we assumed we were holding. If we're honest about what the grip is actually protecting, we have to look past the obvious answer. We tell ourselves we're holding on to the person, to the outcome, to the dream, and at one level that's true, but underneath that, what we're really guarding is the self that was built around those things. The career plan isn't simply a plan. It's evidence of our foresight, our competence, our worth, the proof that we're someone who knows where they're going. The relationship isn't simply a relationship. It's in some quiet and rarely examined way proof that we're someone worth staying for. The identity, the story of who we are, isn't just a habit, it's the entire architecture through which we understand ourselves. And so when the thing is threatened, what registers as danger isn't only the loss of that particular person or outcome, it's the loss of the self that was organized around it, the self that made sense, that had a shape, that knew what it was. This is why letting go is so much harder than it looks from the outside. To someone watching, the holding on can look like stubbornness or fear of change. But from inside the grip, it feels like self-preservation, because in a genuine sense, that's exactly what it is. The mind isn't being irrational, it's doing precisely what it was built to do. It's protecting the continuity of the self, ensuring the story doesn't collapse, keeping the whole structure intact. The problem is that the structure has become a prison, and the guard at the door has long since forgotten which side of the bars they're on. There's an image the Buddhist teachers come back to often, the image of trying to catch rain in a closed fist. You thrust your hand out into the downpour, fingers clenched, and almost nothing gets in. A few drops through the gaps, and that's all. Open the same hand, hold it flat and still, and the rain collects in the palm. You can feel the weight of it, the cold of it, the way it gathers. The point is simple. The closed fist isn't protecting anything, it's only preventing from receiving. This is how it works with things we want most. People, connection, experience, happiness. The clenching doesn't secure them, it actually blocks them. This isn't only true in the obvious sense. People tend to pull back from those who hold them too tightly, who feel the demand hidden inside the devotion and quietly begin to look for air. Creative work tends to stiffen and die under excessive control. Happiness has this quality of dissolving the moment you decide to pin it down, as though the act of gripping signals to it that it's time to leave. What we most want seems to require a certain looseness in the holding, a willingness to let it be what it is rather than what we need it to be. One of the most common ways people misunderstand this is to hear it as an argument for caring less, for holding everything at a careful distance, becoming the kind of person who's never too invested, never really hurt, present but somehow sealed off from the full weight of experience. The image that tends to come up is of someone who's simply removed themselves from the stakes of their own life, calm because they're empty, at peace because nothing fully lands. That's not what's being pointed at here, it's actually close to the opposite. Clinging doesn't produce depth of feeling, it actually distorts it. The vigilance, the monitoring, the anxious maintenance of the grip, none of that makes the experience of what we love richer, it makes it thinner. It places a layer of fear between you and the experience itself, so that what you're actually experiencing much of the time isn't the person or the work or the place, it's your own anxiety about losing them. The grip is an intimacy, it's a substitute for it, one that feels urgent and devoted, but that is, at its core, a way of not quite arriving, of remaining just outside the thing you most want to be inside of. Imagine a person standing at the bank of a fast-moving river, afraid of the current, holding tight to the roots along the edge. They're technically in contact with the water. It moves against their legs, they can feel the cold of it, but they're not in the river. The actual experience of it, the current, the depth, the way the light moves across the surface, the particular quality of being carried, all of that is unavailable to them because all of their attention is consumed by the effort of not being swept away. Releasing the bank isn't being swept into chaos. It's finally entering the water, finding out that swimming is possible, that the current can be moved with rather than resisted, that the river entered fully is something completely different from the river watched anxiously from its edge. What release actually feels like tends to surprise people because they go in expecting emptiness and find instead a strange kind of vividness. The grief, when it finally arrives cleanly, is real, present, sometimes sharp, but it moves. It has the quality of weather rather than stone. The love that remains once you stop gripping it doesn't reveal itself as smaller than you feared. It tends to become more present, more honest, less tangled up in the anxiety of its own continuation. What you release isn't the feeling itself, it's just the fear that was threaded through it. The Pali Canon, the earliest recorded collection of Buddhist teaching, tends to return to this repeatedly, and what it keeps pointing at is this, that the capacity to be fully present to what you love, to actually feel it without the interference of fear, requires the willingness to hold it lightly. This isn't indifference. It's in some ways the deepest form of attention there is. Attention that isn't trying to freeze the moment in place, that isn't scanning ahead for threats, but that's simply here with the thing itself for as long as the thing is here. That kind of presence isn't available to the clenched fist. It's only available to the open hand. There's still, though, a whole territory of attachment we haven't entered yet, one that's in some ways harder than anything we've covered, because what's being held isn't something beautiful we're afraid of losing. It's something painful that has become, without our quite noticing, part of the structure of who we believe ourselves to be. Most of what we're talking about has the same basic shape. Something good, something wanted, something that mattered, and the fear of losing it. The relationship, the vision of a life, the version of ourselves we'd grown into. The grip and all those things is at least legible. We're holding on to something that was at some point genuinely worth holding. But there's another kind of attachment that's harder to see because it doesn't fit that shape at all. These are the things we hold not because they're beautiful, but because they're known. The long-carried resentment that has become so familiar it'd feel like losing a piece of furniture to set it down. The identity built around a wound. The person who was abandoned, who was let down by someone they trusted completely, who gave everything to a relationship and received very little back, who was dismissed or passed over in ways that left a mark. These stories are painful. They're also organizing. They explain us to ourselves. They tell us why our walls are where they are, why certain doors stay closed, why we approach certain situations with the wariness we do. They were useful once, and we've been carrying them long enough that we've stopped asking whether they still are, whether the self they describe is still the self we actually are. What makes this particularly hard to look at is that releasing it can feel like betrayal of the experience itself, of the genuine difficulty of what happened. If I stop carrying this, does that mean it didn't matter? Does letting go of the story mean forgiving the person who caused it? Does moving past it somehow erase the fact that it was real? These are the questions that keep the grip in place, and they deserve a straight answer, because the answer in almost every case is no. Releasing a story doesn't erase what happened. It simply stops making what happened the organizing center of the present. No one releases this kind of holding through just a decision. The decision is rarely where the real work happens anyways. What tends to come first is simply the recognition, quiet, unjudgmental, that you're holding something, that your hands have grown so used to the weight that you stop feeling it. That noticing, if you can stay with it without immediately needing to act on it, is often enough to begin the loosening. Not fully releasing, just the first honest acknowledgement that the grip is there, that it's costing something, and that the cost is real. You might have the impression that letting go is a single act, a moment of clarity, of bravery, a decision made, a grip finally and permanently opened. But that's not really how it works, and it's worth being honest about that because the gap between the insight and the lived experience of it is where most people actually give up. Letting go is a practice in the same way that attention is a practice. You don't achieve it once and then possess it. You need to keep noticing that you started gripping and keep opening your hand again and again and again. The practice isn't the absence of clinging, it's the continued returning to openness after the clinging resumes, which it will. The measure of your practice isn't how rarely you grip onto something, it's how quickly and how gently you notice when you have. What this looks like in practice begins earlier than most people expect. Before trying to release anything, there's the prior work of learning to recognize the sensation of clinging when it's happening. The grip has a physical character, a tightening somewhere in the chest or the shoulders, a quality of bracing, the feeling of a mind that's locked onto something and won't move. Learning to recognize this, not analyze it necessarily, not judge it, just recognize it, is already most of the work. That recognition creates a small but real distance between the grip and the self doing the gripping. And in that distance, something becomes possible that wasn't possible before. It's also worth being honest about loss, because real letting go involves real loss, and real loss involves grief. Grief isn't a sign that something's gone wrong. The Buddhist understanding here is careful. The goal has never been to be unmoved by impermanence, to watch everything change and feel nothing. The goal is something more like the capacity to feel things fully, to let grief be grief and joy be joy without the added weight of trying to stop them from being what they naturally are. The pain of genuine loss, moved through cleanly, is shorter and lighter than the pain of loss held still. Because what we're releasing in the end isn't the feeling itself, it's just the resistance to it and what becomes available on the other side. Not all at once, but gradually, the way attention you'd stop noticing begins to ease, is a quality of presence that the grip had been making unavailable. The ordinary movement, arrived at without agenda. The person in front of you met without the overlaid anxiety of what their presence means for the future. The experience of a day that simply is what it is, held lightly and therefore fully for exactly as long as it lasts. There's something the Buddhist traditions calls upekkha, usually translated as equanimity, though upekkha carries a bit more warmth than equanimity tends to suggest. Upekkha doesn't mean detachment. It doesn't mean the careful removal of yourself from the stakes of your own life. It means something closer to a settled clarity, the ability to be fully present to what is here, fully open to what arrives, without the constant background effort of trying to make it permanent. Upekkha is the quality of someone who has stopped fighting the river and learned at last to swim. What tends to surprise people who arrive at even a partial version of this is that it doesn't feel like loss. They expect to find emptiness, to discover that letting go means caring less, feeling less, being somehow diminished. What they find instead is that the things that matter still matter, only differently, more directly, with less interference from the fear of their eventual ending. The love that remains when you stop gripping isn't smaller than what the grip was protecting, it's actually larger, because it's finally free to be what it actually is, rather than what the fear needed it to be. The hand reaching back towards what's gone, towards the closed door, the ended relationship, the version of a life that didn't happen, that impulse may never fully disappear. It's one of the most human things there is. What changes isn't the impulse. What changes is the relationship to it, the ability to feel it without being controlled by it, to notice the reaching and, with some gentleness towards yourself, let the hand come to rest. There's a quality to the open hand that the closed fist never had access to. The closed fist is full of the thing it's holding, of the effort of holding, of the vigilance required to keep holding. The open hand is available available to what's already here, available to what's still to come, to the texture of this moment, which will not repeat, which is already beginning to change, and which, for exactly that reason, is worth being present for entirely. That's what remains when you finally let go. Not less. Everything else